subject of death and dying can be a very difficult conversation to have. Many of us avoid having the conversation because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't want to worry or upset our loved ones, and we really don't want to face tough questions or think about our own death. Having open conversations about death and dying allows us to prepare ourselves and our loved ones on how we would like to create our own end-of-life journey. On every episode of Guided Crossings, we will explore a different part of the dying process and offer suggestions on how to prepare your loved ones as well as yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Sebastian, and this is Guided Crossings.
Being a main caregiver, creating an end-of-life plan, and surviving the loss of a loved one is very difficult. And today's guest is no stranger to this. When in 2014, his beautiful wife passed away, he decided to share what he learned through the process and created a handbook for others to use. I'd like to welcome Douglas Dowell to the show. Douglas, thank you so much for being here.
And you can call me Doug.
Okay, I'll call you Doug.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about your story.
The story starts, as you mentioned, with my late wife, Doris. Doris and I were married in 1998, second marriage for both. We had we met in 1998, we were married later. Wonderful experience. She was a wonderful lady. She's quite well known in the Merrimack area where I live. A few years after we were together, however, she started having some symptoms. Anyhow, long story short, she had cancer. She fought it very hard, tooth and nail, for a total of about 10 years or so. But in the end, the cancer was victorious. This handbook and all my thought processes on this stem entirely from that experience. I maybe had thought about these things a little bit earlier, but this was real time, working with her and planning doctor visits and all the treatments and everything, and then at a certain point recognizing what the destination was. And
so did you write this book with her, or you wrote it after she had passed away?
She had died by the time I got to it. The thought process, well, actually part of it, I was taking some notes and writing some things that I kept separate. There's a survivorship aspect of this that I'd like to talk about, but certain parts of this we did discuss in advance, not related to the handbook itself, but to the process that she was going through. Mm-hmm. But there were certain things about, okay, how am I going to handle things when she's gone, that I didn't necessarily need to discuss with her personally. I could just think it through, get some ideas, and be ready to go. And I addressed that in the handbook part.
Right. You encourage everyone over the age of 18 to create an end-of-life plan. Why do you think that's so important?
I think everybody who reaches the age of majority, you become an adult, has to recognize you have a lot of responsibilities, and the older you get, you do more and more things, you accumulate more property, you have more relationships, life gets complex. And like it or not, we can all be visited at any time by the end of life.
Right.
There's another aspect that I am a big believer in planning. If you plan to the extent that you don't enjoy your life, well, you're over planning, but I think you can enjoy your life more if you plan for things. And something I think is overlooked a lot is the planning process itself generates thoughts and activities that help you understand what you need to do at any point in your life. And I think you're more comfortable if you kind of have some guidelines in your mind about how you want to live and how you want to die.
And I think that's so true. I think that everyone's afraid of the conversation, but then my experience has been when people start talking about it, and writing things down or just opening up the conversation, they realize they're not afraid of it anymore. And it's not an easy conversation by any means, but
No.
and maybe you hit on something where we do have to be organizers or planners, because I think that's a big part of it too. I'm a planner, so I understand 100% the importance of this.
Yes.
You know, one of the other things that we often don't know how to do is how to create the conversation. How do you start the conversation? What do you have any tips for people on what's a good way of doing that? I know one of my previous guests had said, we always did it on road trips. So I was like, oh, you'd lock everyone in the car and go, we're going to talk death.
They're not making eye contact.
Right.
They're looking forward.
Right.
And there's, I think, a lot of conversations happen in cars that don't happen on a personal basis, like sitting in a living room. But to answer your question, I think it depends on the maturity of the individual you're dealing with. Certain people are absolutely ready to go at whatever age. Yeah, let's talk about this because I'm a planner too. I'm going to get this done and I don't want to have to deal with it later. And that not deal with it later aspect is something that I think is very important about this process. I kind of lost my train of thought there. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Well, many people do create an end-of-life plan. And so let's talk with the handbook. What are some of the first steps that you think are super important when you're starting to do a plan?
I think you should start with the very basics, the legalistic parts of this. Start with the estate planning part of it and work your way towards the end part of it.
When you say estate planning, what do you mean for people who aren't sure?
I think everybody I think needs a will or a trust. They need to do certain planning that if you were to die today, what happens with your property, what happens with relationships, whatever it is, all that kind of things, those kinds of things that, and we'll talk about it later about durable power of attorney for health care. Those are the fundamental things that are part of estate planning, and it's pretty straightforward. I recommend that a person there's a lot of good books out there about estate planning. There's good software about estate planning, and I recommend people go through the books or even the software. It forces you to focus and think about things that are important in terms of dealing with your personal estate. In the end, though, I sincerely recommend seeing an attorney and having everything drawn up by an attorney so everything can withstand scrutiny under pressure. And sometimes wills and estate issues are some of the, I happen to have a law degree, and some of the most vicious cases you read about are like Jones versus Jones.
Right.
It's people in the same family fighting over the assets and that kind of thing. But I don't want to go too deep on that. But I think that part of it, get that part done first.
Right.
And then, which this deals with generally, but after that you want to start doing the more deep dive on dealing with healthcare issues and addressing the issue of death and what happens at that time and after that time, and what is the survivor going to do.
So tell me a little bit about, filling out an advance directives and how that kind of plays into the whole preparing, not only just with the will and the trust, and that's sort of like the financial, getting your house in order.
Financial property, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you've got children, who's going to get custody? How is that all worked out?
Right.
So with an advance directive, though, that's more the medical side?
Yeah, that's more related to the medical side. I see three different components of that. One is a living will, which is a document that you end up getting notarized. It's essentially a legal document that you indicate what you want in the end of your life in terms of health care, what they used to call extraordinary procedures. Mm-hmm. You don't hear that expression very often anymore. But how do you want things done at the end of your life? Do you want to be on a respirator for 30 years and you really don't have a high heartbeat? Or do you want to go more, traditionally, more naturally? Those things would be the issues that you would cover in a living will. What's also important, so that's where that would start. The second thing is you need to identify a healthcare agent, so a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And that is one or more individual who carries out your wishes. So these living wills, not something you worry about while you're actually not needing it. It's mainly when you're incompetent or you need somebody else to help you. But the agent, the healthcare agent, is the person who will then carry out your wishes in the based on the
advanced
the living will, based on the living will.
Yeah.
So those are the first two parts of the advance directives. The other part is a do not resuscitate order, and you can find do not resuscitate orders through your healthcare providers. It may transition over a period of time. You may start with one DNR and end up with a different one based on where you are in the dying process.
Right. And, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but one of the things I think people don't understand that. You could say under all circumstances, I don't want to be resuscitated, but sometimes it's not necessary. Like you could be, like someone was saying, I don't want a feeding tube. And it's like, no, but a feeding tube right now is okay. So those decisions that you make, I think even filling out a handbook, people need to understand it doesn't mean you can't go revisit.
Right.
It doesn't mean
and people change their minds.
Your mind.
Yeah, at the last minute, you may, well, you know what, maybe it's not so bad.
Right.
Go ahead and put in the breathing tubes,
Right.
But the
third one.
The PDNR, what's that? Physicians do not resuscitate.
Okay.
I think I have that right. That is a doctor's order. And so once it gets to that point, then they aren't going to violate that. Again, as long as you're awake and talking, people have to follow what you say. But we're talking about when you aren't in that condition. And that DNR is very, very important.
So a lot of the advanced directives and things, who should get copies of that?
The DNR part per se that's a hospital doctor document, so they will have to have possession of that. In any case, you should probably have a copy of that. I believe that all these documents we're talking about, when you get the estate planning documents and the number of different forms and checklists, the kinds of things that I talked about in the handbook, keep them in preferably one place. Wherever you keep them, make sure that your loved ones know where it is, it or those things are. Because one of the things, it sounds absurdly simple, but I pointed out there, the feeling of finality that happens when you watch somebody die is hard to describe unless you've observed it. And there's nobody to ask. I guarantee you'll start thinking, well, where did Joe put those things? I don't know. Ask Joe. Can't ask Joe. And anyhow, I don't want to overdo that.
No, but that's true. I think that's so accurate. I think that, we don't even know what we should have in, I call it a death file or my life file, because we don't know. We don't talk about it. But some of the things that someone might need to put in there would be your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your divorce certificate.
Exactly.
What if, so go ahead, you can expand on that.
Yeah. No, I would say if I could even remember all the details like you just did, have them. And as an example, I only have one child, my son, Evan. And I've gone through this a few times, but I now have a white binder up on a bookshelf. And that either contains the documents or it says where to go to get them. And these various forms and checklists that I have come up with here are all in that. So it's up there. It says, whatever it says, estate plan, he knows where to go get it. And I think it has a key. Put a key, I have a little safe and a little key to that little safe. And so basically where he can go there and almost all the questions will be answered. Even then, there's still something.
Well, I think too, we don't really talk very much about it, but our digital footprint. So like our passwords and all that sort of information, I think, you should have that somewhere. And people are like, no, it's my password, it's private. And it's like, but if you die, we need that,
And it's shocking how much stuff there is. My mother is still living. She's 97.
Nice.
She'll be 97 shortly. And I have, in the last couple of years, basically just taken over her life.
Right.
And she lived a pretty modest life. And I have been shocked. Holy cow, look at all those websites she goes to. Look at all those credit cards she has.
Yeah, exactly.
Look. And like my case is about 5 times as much as hers. And there's a lot of stuff. And recurring charges on your credit cards. Recurring withdrawals from your checking account because you pay your Eversource bill with it or something.
Right.
That stuff needs to be available, readily identifiable so people can get their hands over it. And even then, you're not going to think of everything. There's still going to be something. As much as I thought I had absolutely everything taken care of before Doris died, I realized after I submitted the will to probate, they said, can't use it. Well, why not? It wasn't notarized.
Oh, my goodness.
We went to the notary, and
Together.
she didn't sign it.
Oh, man.
No, she signed it, but she didn't stamp it.
Stamp it.
And
Wow.
like, this can't be happening.
Well, and I think that's what I always blown away with when you hear stories like that, because you are at almost your worst. You know what I mean? You have just lost someone you absolutely love, and you're now stuck with this paperwork type thing,
Right.
you know? And it's those little things that can really make the process that much worse. And I know, like, even things like I've been told when someone passes, you should get at least 10 copies of the death
Yeah.
certificate,
I
because
agree
you
with
need
that.
to make sure that everything you try to close, they're going to ask for that.
Right.
It's not, you know, and it's even, you know, your visa and stuff like that. I mean, you know, my husband and I'll try to say something and they'll be like, well, we need to talk to him. And I'm like, but I'm on the account. But they still won't. They're very strict about
Yeah.
that, which is good for fraud and everything. But
Yeah.
when you're trying to cancel it, you need that information.
Right. Sometimes they'll take copies of death certificates, but you'd be surprised, something that you wouldn't think they'd, well, no, I need an original. Okay,
Yeah.
it's nice to have the original. Yeah, you've paid $25 each or something, but it's a lot better than going through the hassle. And something you hit on there, you may not be in the mood to deal with all this stuff.
Right.
You're not probably thinking really clearly, and which is a whole part of what I'm thinking about, my idea about the planning process. Get it done, have it behind you, and enjoy your life, and update it once in a while, but just make the whole process easier at the end.
Right, right. One of the things that I think is really good about your particular handbook is when you talked about personal care. And I thought that really struck me how you mentioned toothpaste
Right.
and what flavor of toothpaste your loved one might like, or if they want hot water or cold water. And, you know, you read it and you go, okay, it's toothpaste. But when someone is very either confused or,
Yeah.
you know, if I think of like someone who might be suffering with dementia or something, or just uncomfortable, those simple life, like basic life needs, if you can mate them with something, knowing that, I think is amazing. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and there's no end to that list.
Right.
Well, for some reason while you're talking, I think, well, and some people can't stand the smell of perfumes.
Yeah.
I don't want a caregiver in my room,
Yeah.
you know, that's going to have such a scent. Just a person may not be able to communicate exactly what all their needs are, and these things may be so fundamental, you've observed them for years and not realized that they really at 9 in the morning like to turn on Good Morning America.
Right.
All of those kinds of things. The more of those things that you can identify and write down through the conversation, just list them. I'm a big believer in checklists. My observation is a checklist will scream at you when something's not done in a way that nothing else will. Oh, I haven't checked that off. And again, in a day-to-day life of any human being, it's probably just absolutely shocking the number of things. Things like also associated with this, do they want visitors? Do they want no visitors? They want some visitors? Are there certain people that they do not want to come into the room? Et cetera. All those things should be well identified, and make certain that last, we're talking about, let's say, the last period of their life, right before they die, that they're very comfortable.
Well, and I think too, people don't realize how many people are nonverbal at that point.
Right.
And, you know, I think unless you're faced with it, you don't know all these things,
Yes.
you know? And I think, you know, again, the comfort, you know, a lot of times you hear one person was the caregiver, they didn't leave that person's side or whatever, but that's not always reality. So if you have it written down what your preferences are and someone steps in, they'll be able to step in and help and make you feel, the patient or, you know, your loved one, feel comfortable. So
People
it's
don't
really
always
good.
die in the order you think they
Right.
would. The caregiver may die before the unhealthy person dies. So
That's true.
if you have all this stuff down, it saves a lot in the end.
Yeah. Another topic that's really important that we don't really touch on a lot is survivor planning. And
Right.
you've touched on that in your handbook, which was really good. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, and I kind of, if you don't mind, tell you a little personal anecdote.
Sure.
Doris and I used to visit my now late father and stepmother in Palm Desert, California, and we always enjoyed it. We'd go on these walks up into the canyons, and the last time we went, which wasn't long before Doris died, she couldn't make that walk, and I did, and I think 4 days in a row, it was like a lightning bolt hitting me. You know, she's going to die. She's going to die soon, and I'm not. As simple as that sounds, it hit me, like I said, like a lightning. Okay, I've got to start figuring out what am I going to do? And I don't mean, am I going to get married again or anything like that, but exactly how am I going to handle this transition? And for one thing, I composed, just maybe a minor item here, but I just composed a list of people that I would send an email to saying Doris died. And that list was very long, and I kind of wrote it down, but I didn't put it together. Truthfully, I didn't put it where Doris could see it. Mm-hmm. There were a number of things like that I just kind of kept to myself. But a lot of what I have here stemmed from me thinking about, okay, how about credit cards? How about every single thing that we touch together? What's going to happen? Who do I need to call? What do I need to do? And I also recognize that we had not done certain planning well enough. And we made some sort of last-minute adjustments financially and otherwise to make sure everybody was properly taken care of. Mm-hmm. Again, the planning process kind of drives that, and this is more last minute than I'd like to admit, but it kind of pushed me over to where, okay, let's not make it last minute for somebody else.
Right, and I think that's a really good point too, right? You always think you have more time, and then, life...
You might.
Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, and that's it, That's a really good, again, too, I think it's interesting that you talk about survivorship sort of thing, and who would you, it's okay to sort of think about it, and who would you want around you when that happens? Is that something that is all part of that in the...
Yeah, and like, how do you manage the visitor flow? I learned that the hard way.
Okay.
Doris was hospitalized at a certain point, and I realized people were coming in and out of here. There's too many people, and some of them were loud. I learned the hard way. I needed to manage that better.
So you needed to manage it. This might be a little personal, but did you and Doris speak about that? And she kind of said, or did you just know that
we did speak about it, and I made some adjustments along the way.
Yeah.
But, in fact, even the survivorship part, we did talk about a number of things. I didn't keep the whole thing hidden from her, but at certain things you just don't need to say to the person who knows they're going to die, okay, here's what I'm going to do when you die. I mean, you can handle it. Everybody needs to be mature enough, do things right. I didn't keep secrets from Doris, but I didn't necessarily put that in front of her either while we're doing this.
Right. And I think that's important. I think every situation's different. And I think that's the thing. It's not one size fits all. So what worked for you and Doris might not be what's going to work for somebody else, and that's okay. Exactly. But I think with the handbook, there's some really, really critical information in there that at least gets it started, and people can at least start a conversation and then think about it, even if you don't think it's going to happen for a long time, which, who knows?
Again, and
no
hopefully
one knows.
So. Hopefully so.
One of the other things that you touch on that I really liked a lot was your informal planning. And you had said, I want to make sure I get it right. You had said, try not to leave any unfinished business or unresolved issues between you and your loved one, which I thought was really sweet. Try to live each day with awareness of the gift that it is, instead of, I guess, dwelling on the fact that someone's dying. And be immensely conscious of what you say, and be immensely conscious of what you don't say when you should say something. Can you touch on that? Because that really hit me about, I've been in situations where someone's dying and you don't want to say it because you don't want to tell them, but they know.
Yeah.
So how do you, reconcile around all that sort of thing and make sure that you don't leave things unsaid, like you said, because you might not get that second chance.
It's more than anything, I think it's a mindfulness kind of idea. Again, I don't mean to talk too much about this, but the finality, I kept thinking, I've covered everything. But I wanted to say, stop. No, wait, I'm not ready. Yeah. I'm not ready. And I realized, it doesn't matter how ready you are, it's over. And I pretty much had this mind, I keep putting my hand on this, talk about the subject matter, but I pretty much had addressed that issue a long time earlier, but it just drove it home to me. Live your life in a way that's not going to happen to you. I think you'll be happier in any case. And everybody's imperfect. It's going to happen anyway. Particularly in a marriage, stuff happens. I had a friend die recently that the last time we saw each other was a really uncomfortable experience. Oh. And I thought, Could I have handled all that better? And yeah, I could have. Do I regret that I was so assertive with them? Not really, but I could perhaps have tried to patch things up, and I didn't. So I got the message, oh, by the way, he's gone. And I thought, well, I didn't feel very good either. So yeah, that's really what it amounts to, is try to live your life. And I one time thought of just putting this square together, wish I had, wish I hadn't, said and done.
Oh.
Then that whole square there, every box should be empty.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have anything in those squares.
Regrets.
So that's where that concept really came from.
No, it's really touching. I think that a lot of people should be more cognizant of that, because like you said, you don't know. I have a few friends that I know they had horrible situations with their own parents and things, and then they got the call, and it's like, you don't get a do-over.
You don't.
And everyone can tell you it's okay, they know, but you're just like, oh, do they? Like, you just don't want that. So
that stuff will rattle around in your head.
Yeah.
And it's not fun.
Right.
And I have no big regrets. I really don't.
Right.
But I learned a lot by paying attention to what I was going through. I had some regrets. I would do over.
It's interesting you say that, because you had a lot of time, I guess, to really think it through.
Yes.
And I think that's pretty interesting. So, like, how much of has your personality changed with that experience to how you were before?
It changed, and people have commented on
Really?
how it's changed. And I don't know. I think maybe I'm a more patient person than before. I try not to. I've got a philosophy. Few things matter very much, and most things just don't matter at all. So figure out what's important to you and focus on those things. The other things, just let them go. They're irrelevant to you.
Yeah, that's really good advice. The other thing about your handbook, because we're almost running out of time, that I really liked was all the information to get medicine trackers and things like that. So could you just touch on that quickly? Yeah.
Like these days when you go to a doctor, they ask you for a list of all your prescriptions, or surgeries. So I started doing that for myself. There ends up being a lot of things like that, medicine, then tracking it, and particularly like pain management if there's opioids. I've got forms in here that anybody can just take, copy them, print them out, whatever, that they'll help you track all those things and have them in top of mind.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time, so could you tell me how we can get our hands on this handbook?
Sure. I think if it's up there, douglasdowell@gmail.com. Send me an email, and I will send you a PDF of this document, including the attachments.
Well, Doug, thank you so much. I loved it. And I hope you get a lot of response from it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.